Hey there, chatters. I'm Nat.
And I'm Kat, and welcome to the Crime Chat. I am your forensic femme fatale, and Natalie is your true crime addict connoisseur.
We're just two normal girls who obsess about dark crimes, evil minds, and occasionally the unknown.
Here is your disclaimer, chatters. The following Crime Chat contains adult content and descriptions of potentially violent scenarios. Your listener discretion is advised.
You have been warned, and before we get into today's Crime Chat, Kat, what have you done? Where are you right now?
If you're watching on the video on our Patreon, I have the Northern Lights behind me. Isn't it beautiful?
Yes.
So Nat got me for my birthday a green screen. So I had to use it.
You can go anywhere now.
I can go anywhere. I can do anything.
I just want to give a shout out because Kat and I both are wearing our Crime Chat Crime and Cosmetics palette tonight.
Yes. I'm wearing the glitter. I love the glitter.
Yes, it's gorgeous. I did the red and the black, but look at those colors, girl.
They're beautiful.
Look at that. That's blood right there.
Yes, it is. The bloodbathery.
That's crazy. And the glitter is so like you put it on, it stays like it's.
Oh, it does.
Very pigmented.
It's glitter for days.
It's glitter for days. And we want to thank the people who have been supporting us and the makeup artists who have been just kind of like spreading the good word about the palette. We had Lady Venom, Tenacity, Mad Love put the palette together for us. That's who we collabed with, Mad Love Cosmetics.
Yes.
And a couple of the makeup artists. Who else participated?
Oh, Nikki B.
And
I think Alyssa Scott as well.
Okay. Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our chatters who have supported us.
So what have you been doing, Kat?
So it's been a while. We've had a little bit of a rough start to season 2.
Yeah.
So in the midst of hurricanes and I'm getting over the flu.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to not sound so nasally, but it's gonna happen.
We both sound like we're from New York right now.
Yes, we do. We should say Fran Drescher.
We both sound like her. Marissa Tomei from my cousin Vinny.
Yeah, I will do my best not to cough. But I've had time to do a lot of binge watching, and I have some sad news.
Oh no.
The Walking Dead is over.
It's over. Silence. Let's just give it a moment. I need a minute. Okay. Then it's over. I know.
An era has come to an end.
It has.
Yes. The season finale, series finale really was great. It kind of led you up to all the different types of spin-offs. And then, of course, Rick showed up at the very end. He didn't die on the bridge.
So was it like at the very, very end when he came?
The very end.
Like a cowboy, he just came strolling up with the sunset?
And not really.
Okay.
Were you watching it when Rick was killed, quote unquote killed?
No.
Okay. So it led up to give you an indication. I mean, how it happened, it would be very surprising anybody would survive that because it was a lot of blowing up and a lot of fire and it was a lot of. He was basically kidnapped afterwards.
By who?
Well, I am assuming we're going to find out, but they basically led it up to where at the end, spoiler alert, where he escaped and was writing a letter to Judith and writing a letter to Michonne and a letter in a bottle, literally rolling it up, putting it in a bottle, throwing it in a zombie-filled river.
Right.
And they located him. The spin-off series, Rick and Michonne, is probably going to answer a lot of those questions.
Okay.
What's going on? A Daryl spin-off. Daryl's still kicking. Carol's still kicking. Those are the two OGs that are still around.
If they would have died. If anything ever happened to Daryl, we riot.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh yes. Daryl Dixon. Oh, yeah. Norman Reedus. Yeah. Like a rough kind of sexy.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's going to be a Negan and Maggie spinoff as well.
Okay.
So
a combination I still don't get, but
and in the last episode too, it was very touching. They had a very nice dialogue moment. So Negan had been a prisoner for several seasons by our lead group. He went away for a while and then ended up coming back to the group. But he was trying to become just a regular citizen. And then finally, on the last episode, Maggie tells him, "You've earned your place and you're welcome to stay." and essentially not be a prisoner because he saved her life actually on a couple occasions, but he also
he put a bat to Glenn's head.
Yeah, he did.
Lucille. Whatever happened to Lucille?
Yeah. I think Lucille's like long gone.
Yeah.
Something happened to Lucille. I don't remember. Did you know Lucille was after his wife? That's why he named the bat Lucille.
Because he loved her or because he hated her?
No, he loved her.
Okay.
She died early on in the apocalypse. She had cancer.
Okay.
Like when everything happened. And she ended up dying. But when he became the way that he was, when we first were introduced to him, the bat was named after his wife, Lucille.
Wow.
So obviously she's passed away, whatever. He's married again and he's got a baby on the way.
Oh, okay.
So that'll be interesting. I'm really excited to see kind of the spin-offs and keep the story going. I've watched the Interview with the Vampire Anne Rice series, also on AMC. Freaking amazing. We talked about it before.
Yeah.
Grey Worm is the lead character from Game of Thrones.
Right.
And then Chris and I binge watched The Serpent Queen, which is on Starz. And the lead character in that was a main villain in a couple seasons in The Walking Dead.
I have to check that out.
Yeah, no, okay. It's got a dark, twisted comedy to it.
Okay. All right. I like that.
So, yeah.
Right.
What about you? Have you had time to watch anything?
Yes, I got hooked on a Netflix series called Blown Away. It's actually been out. It's been out for 3 years. And it's a reality game competition where there are artists that blow glass.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Their art. I never knew about it. It's amazing.
Wow.
I always knew about glass blowing, but I never watched how intense it is. So
yeah.
Immediately looking for classes to take in Florida, and I found a couple. So hopefully.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, that is the coolest thing. They're so pretty.
If I go glass blowing, I will share some pictures on the Patreon.
Yeah.
And I won't kill myself. I will not set myself on fire. I promise. Maybe. I don't know. Kat, before you get into today's story, okay, which I know is going to be a doozy.
Oh, it is. It is.
I'm going to go over some close calls of assassinations for presidents, because we've had a couple, Kat,
yeah.
Did you know that American presidents have been targeted for assassination more than 20 times in our history? More than 20 times.
I knew it was quite a few, but that's more than I thought.
Yeah. And you know something? Probably 20 that we know.
Well, that's true too.
I'm sure there's a lot that we don't know.
All the secrets.
4 of the presidents actually being assassinated, who they are Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and JFK.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm going to recap are 8 failed attempts that almost succeeded.
Okay.
So first one on January 30th, 1835, on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, an unemployed House patron named Richard Lawrence approached President Andrew Jackson and pulled a gun on him. However, it misfired.
Oops.
Jackson, being the badass that he was, pulled out his cane and beat his ass.
Yes.
However,
that's when presidents were approachable and walking on the street, like any type of politician or whatever now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, however, Richard did come with Plan B, and he had a second pistol. He pulled that one out, and guess what? That misfired too. So,
oops.
Yeah, oops. That's a big
double oopsie. Yeah.
The Smithsonian Institute later determined that the odds of both pistols misfiring are 1 in 125,000. Really unlucky.
Yeah, that's bad odds.
Yeah, bad odds.
Yeah.
He would be tried for this assassination attempt. And I love how they say it the assassination attempt. He tried to assassinate him twice. Okay. Yeah. In one single event. Assassination attempts. Right, exactly. But he was found not guilty as a reason of insanity, and he would spend the rest of his life in an insane asylum. In August 1864, President Lincoln was riding his horse in Washington, D.C. at night alone, which is not good. I don't know. Today, that would never happen.
Oh, no. The presidents go out for runs and stuff, and they got the Secret Service right there with them.
Yeah. They don't even drive cars. You can't go anywhere with... No. So an unidentified gunman fired a single shot. The bullet passed right through his Tom hat, which is that long, tall, black hat that he used to wear.
His signature hat.
And it missed his head by inches.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I wonder if that hat is anywhere in any museum.
Ooh, that's a good question.
That'd be
Ooh.
interesting. Huh.
If it is, I will pull the picture of it and put it on the Patreon.
Okay.
On October 14th, 1912, Teddy Roosevelt ran for president, and during one of his campaign speeches in Milwaukee, a saloon keeper shot him once in the chest. Roosevelt, his 50-page speech that he was going to read that day, including his eyeglass case, actually slowed the bullet down that saved his life.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. That's some heavy words there.
Yeah, exactly. And stubborn Roosevelt, he was determined that he was just fine, and he gave his speech anyway. He spoke for 90 minutes, showing, even like opening up his coat to show the bloody shirt while he's bleeding at that moment.
Yeah.
Saying that it takes more than that to kill a bull moose, which we've determined, Kat and I determined that means that's a male moose, right?
Yeah, just like you ever heard of somebody being bullheaded?
Yeah.
That's kind of like stubborn.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay, so now on February 15th, 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency was almost over before it began after a gunman opened fire on him in Miami 3 weeks before he was sworn in. Roosevelt was unhurt, but there were 4 other people that were injured, and the Chicago mayor at the time, Cermak, was killed. However, there is a conspiracy surrounding this one, and it states that FDR was not the target. It was actually the mayor, because the mayor had a feud with Capone. And I believe that. I totally believe that.
Oh, yeah. We did a couple of mob episodes last season.
In 1981, and I remember this as a child, I remember seeing this on the TV. Ronald Reagan was walking back to his limousine at the Capitol, and he and 3 other men were shot by John Hinckley Jr. Hinckley claimed afterwards that he tried to kill the president to impress the actress Jodie Foster at the time.
I remember this. So, Crime Chat fun fact. I was told I looked like Jodie Foster growing up.
You're prettier than Jodie Foster.
No.
Sorry.
But no, I'll put some pictures up on the Patreon, and you chatters out there, you can let us know what you think. I'll try to find some, like, adolescent, preteen type pictures. I mean, she was really big then anyways, like Silence of the Lambs, and, she was pretty popular.
Yeah, and that movie Contact, which is like the worst movie that has ever been filmed. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah. It's been a very, very long time, but yeah.
Oh my God. No one died, but the press secretary, James Brady, was permanently disabled, and he actually became the catalyst behind the Brady Bill, which instituted the federal background checks for people purchasing firearms.
Yes.
And he's still in the media. You can still see him.
Yeah, he's still around.
3 months into Bill Clinton's presidency, during a trip to Kuwait University, 14 men believed to be working for Saddam Hussein smuggled explosives to assassinate him with car bombs as revenge for defeating Iraq in the Gulf War.
So Kuwait are our friends. They love Americans. We saved their country. So they were like, they will be like forever indebted to us. And their federal, like military, police, Secret Service-ish, like similar is
comparable.
They're fierce.
Fierce.
They're fierce. Yeah. No fucks given.
Good. It's good to have strong, powerful friends. In 1996, Clinton's motorcade was traveling through Manila about to cross the bridge, and the intelligence officers intercepted a message suggesting that there was an attack coming. The Secret Service director ordered a reroute of the motorcade and did not cross the bridge, and they later found that there was a bomb on the structure. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. I kind of remember this. It was the very, very, very beginning of my service around this time frame, but I want to say I remember that.
Yeah, that's pretty scary.
Yeah.
The American government's investigation of the plot revealed that its mastermind was the Saudi terrorist living in Afghanistan at the time.
Okay, that's why.
Osama bin Laden.
That's why I know. That's why I remember it. Okay.
In 2005, George W. Bush was giving a speech in the Republic of Georgia when a man in the crowd pulled a pin and threw a hand grenade, which only landed 61 feet away from Bush at the time. However, the hand grenade was wrapped with a red handkerchief. And when he went to throw it, I guess the pin, it was wrapped so tightly that the pin didn't allow it to
well, because you hold the grenade down and you pull the pin. So it probably, the pressure, handle.
What's a firing pin? What's a firing pin? Because that's what they called it. in the story, firing pin?
It's basically like an igniter, something that kind of makes the spark go.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm imagining that the handle probably, you pull the pin and the handle probably wasn't released. Like once the handle releases, that's when it probably strikes the firing pin or the igniter and it makes it go kaboom. So it was probably wrapped so tight around the handle that even though he pulled the pin, it wasn't able to detonate.
That makes sense. What a crazy, freaky thing to do. Okay. Well, the attacker, when this failed attempt was happening, he melted back into the crowd and was apprehended only months later to confess to the assassination attempt. So that was just some of our presidential close calls.
Well, we're going to talk about a close encounter. No, not even a close encounter. We're going to talk about an actual call, I guess. Okay. And this episode is a chatter request from Tom. So shout out to Tom.
Shout out, Tom.
We were in Germany together and then we were in DC together when I was working. And of course, talking about the podcast and everything. He was fascinated with the Marilyn Monroe stuff. He's like, it'd be great to see if this lone gunman theory of Lee Harvey Oswald is a thing. He's like, I think it's a conspiracy. So that's what we're going to be talking about. This is going to be the first part. We're going to kind of get into a little bit of the history of Lee Harvey Oswald. Next episode, we're going to talk about the assassination attempts, some of the more conspiracies.
Okay.
But it is just at 59 years since Lee Harvey Oswald shot and killed President John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. It was in November of 1963. But as many events in the public eye, some question, did he work alone? What do you think, Nat?
I do not. Negative. I don't think it was a he. I don't think he did it.
You don't think he did it?
I think there was a conspiracy. I think it was, I don't know. I believe the grassy knoll.
Okay. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the theories. We'll talk about where he was at, some of the evidence that's part of the investigation, and how they determined it to be Lee Harvey Oswald. But you're not alone. About 2/3 of Americans believe there's more to the investigation than was released, and this quote-unquote lone gunman theory is just a cover-up. A Gallup poll taken April 2001 indicated Americans believed it was a conspiracy and there were more people involved than just Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, I'm going to refer to Lee Harvey Oswald mostly as LHO, just because it's easier to say. So if I say LHO, that equals Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't want to say, not that it's a super long name, but it's just easier to say LHO. It's a cool
nickname. I like it.
So this Gallup poll states, quote, Americans cite the mafia, which is 13%, and the federal government, another 13%, most often, when saying that there's conspiracy, followed by CIA, 7%, Fidel Castro or Cuba at 5%, and then another 5% were, quote, special interests who disagreed with Kennedy's policies, end quote. Now, this 40% of Americans, while they couldn't necessarily name a person or a group involved in the conspiracy, most Americans believe that there is more to it. We'll talk about how this came about too. As we talked about in the Marilyn Monroe 2-part series that we did last season, Robert Kennedy pursued numerous cases against organized crime, specifically Jimmy Hoffa and the Mafia, while he served as Attorney General. And there was also a conspiracy regarding Fidel Castro-led assassination due to the 1961 invasion of Cuba during JFK's federal presidency. Now, are you ready to get into the communism and conspiracies surrounding Lee Harvey Oswald and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy?
Let's do it. All
right, here we go. We're diving deep, chatters. The John F. Kennedy Dallas Police Department collection contains over 11,400 documents and photographs, including homicide reports, affidavits, witness statements, newspaper clippings, and other correspondence. The Dallas Municipal Archives, a division of the city's secretary's office, possesses all of these original files, except those that have been transferred permanently to the Federal Investigation Collection at National Archives. It also contains 404 photographs that include the sniper's nest in the downtown Dallas, Texas school book depository building, where LHO allegedly fired on Kennedy's motorcade, the back and front yards of the boarding house at 214 Neely, and we'll talk about some of his addresses, the Dealey Plaza, the intersection of 10th Street and Patton Avenue, where Oswald allegedly fatally shot Dallas patrolman J.D. Tippit. We'll talk about that. Interiors of the Texas Theater, where LHO was arrested by Dallas police, and the basement of the Dallas City Hall, where Jack Ruby shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald on November 24th, 1963. Now, in the absence of meaningful local or federal open records laws that came into around the 1970s, Watergate. Okay, that cough was a real one.
That was real.
The Kennedy records were more forgotten than actually restricted and were open to public inspection through a few specifically made written requests to the department or the police chief. A first set of documents related to the Kennedy assassination were discovered by the city's record management officer during a records inventory of the Dallas Police Department in 1989. 26 years later, they found these documents and they're like, oh shit, we probably should do something with this.
A president is dead. How does something like that get lost?
Right. So between 1963, when JFK was assassinated, and 1989, when these documents were discovered, they were housed in a filing cabinet with other historical materials and subsequently appraised as no longer administratively needed by the police department. However, since they possessed historical and permanent value, they were transferred to the municipal archives. Most of the time after this, they would be destroyed. All the records would be destroyed.
Even for a presidential...
Well, and that's because of who it was.
Yeah.
That's why they decided to keep it and archive it.
Okay.
While it appeared the records were closed, in truth, they were never actually meant to be restricted. I'll kind of get into this part of the conspiracy of when everything started to pop up. A little-known press release from Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry on November 25th, 1963 stated, quote, when the investigation in the case of Lee Harvey Oswald is completed, insofar as the Dallas Police Department is concerned, we intend to make the entire file public unless federal authorities specifically request some part be withheld and turned over to them. Unless we are specifically instructed otherwise from Washington, we believe it can and should become public information. At this time, we cannot designate when a release will be made. Now, this was made immediately after, like, the assassination, right? So they made this statement saying, when everything's done, we'll release it. So it was never intended to be, like, restricted or super secret files.
Right.
Now, nearly 30 years after this chief's forgotten utterance in his press conference, it did become reality. Now, of the records and everything that happened, much more notice was taken after the addition of several more feet of documents in 1992, and this is large.
Several more feet of documents? Did you just say
several more feet of documents,
feet?
Like feet, not like patter, but like measurement foot.
Oh my God! Okay.
I mean, 11,000 documents.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah, pictures, statements, everything. This was largely in response to the late 1991 release of Oliver Stone's film, JFK. You've seen it, yeah?
Great movie.
Parts of which were actually shot in Dallas. And in January of 1992, the Dallas City Council passed Resolution 92-0438, ordering the release of, quote, all files, documents, papers, films, audio, or any other evidence held by the Dallas Police Department or any city department or agency regarding the John F. Kennedy assassination, the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald, and Jack Ruby to the public and media immediately, that the Dallas Police Department and other city departments transfer all John F. Kennedy assassination documents and related materials to the Dallas Municipal Archives and Record Center for preservation and release to the public, end quote. Because it had been nearly 30 years that nobody's seen any of these documents, all of a sudden they pop up and they're like, oh, the government must be hiding something.
Right.
So this is where a lot of the conspiracies kind of popped up. But I want to start off talking about Lee Harvey Oswald. Who was he? Lee Harvey Oswald, LHO. Born October 18th, 1939 in Nolens, Louisiana, to Robert Edward Lee Oswald Sr. and Marguerite Frances Claverie. LHO's father, Robert, was a third cousin to President Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and a distant cousin to General Robert E. Lee. Robert also served in the Marines, but sadly would pass away 2 months before the birth of LHO of a heart attack. Robert Jr., LHO's older brother, also served as a Marine. After the death of Robert Sr., the family moved from New Orleans to Dallas, Texas. As a child, LHO was described as temperamental and somewhat withdrawn, and as a teenager would be admitted to a juvenile reformatory, wherein he was diagnosed with, quote, personality pattern disturbance with schizoid features and passive-aggressive tendencies, end quote. He also may have had a literary disability, and now some of his writings, he wrote a diary. So a lot of his own personal things are like all written out, and you can see like grammar and spelling and that kind of thing. So it could have been a learning disability.
Right.
It was discovered that Marguerite, his mother, gave LHO very little affection, and he always felt like he was a burden to her. The family had lived in the Bronx for a little while until school disciplinary actions would cause the family to move back to Nolens. At the age of 16, reports say that LHO was already studying communism.
That's crazy.
But he would join Civil Air Patrol in the New Orleans area. In 1956, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps to allegedly get out from, quote, the yoke of oppression from his mother, end quote. So that came from his older brothers making a statement.
Oh, okay.
As a Marine, he was trained at Keesler Air Force Base, Mississippi. I've been there. I've had some training there myself. As an aircraft control and warning operator, which he finished 7th in a class of 30, which is pretty impressive. Especially for somebody who potentially had a learning disability.
Yeah.
He reported to El Toro, California, wherein he met fellow Marine Carrie Thornley, who created something called Discordianism. I had to look this up. It's a religion or philosophy centered around Discordia, also known as Eris, which is the goddess of chaos. Like, developed this whole, like, religion and theory. I don't know. But he wrote a book about it, and he wrote a fictional book called The Idle Warriors based on LHO. And this was the only book written about LHO before the Kennedy assassination. The United States Marine Corps, as you may know, chatters, is known that all Marines are riflemen, regardless of their occupation, which was true for LHO. He was a sharpshooter and marksman, basically meaning he was slightly above average in like the range and qualifications. However, his career would be less than admirable. He endured 3 court-martials. He was first court-martialed after accidentally shooting himself in the elbow with an unauthorized .22 caliber handgun.
I know somebody who shot themselves in Florida. I worked with the wife. Her husband shot himself with a gun that was in his pocket. So it happens, at least in Florida.
I mean, it does happen.
I know. It's like, how does it happen?
You don't know your weapon. It's like a carelessness. It's to me, in my personal opinion. So the second court-martial was for assault on a non-commissioned officer who was responsible for punishing him in the first incident. And then the third court-martial was for firing his rifle into the jungle for no reason while he was in the Philippines. Just shooting up at ghosts, right? While in the Marines, LHO's pro-Soviet sentiments would arise, including self-taught Russian language. He requested a hardship separation and claimed that his mother needed constant care, and he was placed into the Marine Reserves. Upon his return, he only spent 2 days at home with his mom in Fort Worth, Texas, and then began his journey to the motherland. He arrived in the Soviet Union, issued a visa, and almost immediately began to share his desires for becoming a Soviet citizen. His visa was only good for 1 week, so he had a lot of work to do. And he wasn't able to get it, but on the date of expiration, he applied for the citizenship. However, it was denied, and he was told he had to leave the Soviet Union. A very distraught LHO would then inflict a wound to himself on his left wrist in what he later wrote in a diary, which a lot of these are found in the archives. You can find these online, as a suicide attempt. This delayed his departure because he needed medical care, and he was kept in the hospital under psychiatric observation for another week. During this week that he was in the hospital, on 4 separate occasions, LHO spoke with Soviet officials who questioned his motives, and he continually insisted he just wanted to be a Soviet citizen. LHO was taken to the U.S. Embassy, wherein he was interviewed and stated, quote, "I've made up my mind. I'm through," end quote, renouncing his U.S. citizenship.
Is he military?
Basically unsuitable for service, failure to adapt. There's all kinds of articles that Article 92 or Article 134 under the UCMJ, which you could be administratively discharged, conscientious objector, that kind of thing. So while he was at the embassy, he said he was a radar operator in the Marine Corps and that he voluntarily provided an unidentified Soviet official information regarding his specialty and that he may know something of quote unquote special interest that would benefit the Soviet government. So basically he was threatening the U.S. Embassy that I'm going to become a spy if you don't let me renounce my citizenship.
That's what I would worry about. Like, there's got to be something that we could do from people like that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
His military discharge would change from hardship to undesirable because of his actions. So in his eyes, he felt he officially defected to the Soviet Union. LHO was kept under constant surveillance by Soviets while he was given a higher than average working class amenity such as a furnished apartment, supplemental pay while he worked in a local factory. After a few years, LHO wrote in his diary that he was starting to reconsider his decision. He wrote, quote, "The work is drab. The money I get has nowhere to be spent. No nightclubs or bowling alleys, no places of recreation, except the trade union dances. I have had enough," end quote. While the renouncement of his U.S. citizenship was never made official, like he felt he renounced it, but it never actually happened, he wrote to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow requesting the return of his American passport and proposed to return to the United States so long as any charges against him were dropped. While waiting, LHO met Marina Pruskova, and they married April 30th, 1961, after knowing each other for 6 weeks.
Oh boy.
The Oswald's first child, named June, was born February 15th, 1962. On May 24th, 1962, LHO and Marina applied to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow for documents that enabled her to immigrate to the U.S. as a spouse of a U.S. citizen, I guess. On June 1st, the U.S. Embassy gave Oswald a repatriation loan of $435.71. Now, a repatriation loan is basically where the Department of State provides temporary subsistence and transportation to a U.S. port, like to get them back to the United States.
Okay.
Now, this does have to be repaid, but the Oswalds were able to leave for the United States. Likely while aboard the Mazdam, which was the name of the ship that was returning LHO and his family to the U.S., he wrote some notes on the ship's stationery. And these are also in like the archive files. And they appear to be a summary of what he thought he had learned by living both under a capitalist and a communist system. The notes reflect his unhappy and deepening feeling of disillusionment with both the Soviet Union and the United States, and felt, although reform groups may oppose government in power, they always declare that they are for their people and their country. He then asked himself, like in this note, what would happen if somebody was to stand up and say he was utterly opposed not only to the government, but to the people, to the entire land and complete foundations of his society. He condemned existing political groups and proposed the formation of a third choice somewhere in the middle between communism and capitalism.
Okay.
Neither of which, capitalism or communism, was acceptable to him. And he said, quote, "I have lived under both systems and sought the answers that I thought I would." LHO originally indicated on their travels back to the United States, he and his family would stay with his mother, who lived in Vernon, Texas now. And his decision to stay with his brother, Robert Jr., in Fort Worth apparently had been prompted by his brother's invitation in a letter while he was in Russia beforehand. So all the paperwork, he said, "I'm going to go live with my mother." Brother sends him a letter and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go live with my brother." Yeah. But he didn't declare that. So come back over from the United States, you're going to get interviewed, right? For citizenship and like customs and immigration agents, that kind of thing. Right. So this intake interview, he listed his brother as his only relative on a form which he prepared for the New York Department of Welfare. Upon arrival to the U.S., he received less attention from the press than he expected. Like he expected to be some sort of like spy superstar. Mm-hmm. And LHO commented on the absence of newspaper reporters, and it seemed to Robert, the older brother, that he was disappointed that no one had appeared. Later, LHO said that he was anxious and wanted to avoid publicity. Two sides of the story.
Yeah.
LHO and his family did stay with Robert Jr. and his family for about a month before moving in with his mother. During her testimony later, after the assassinations, Marguerite, the mother, said it was a happy time and she got along with her son and daughter-in-law. However, later, Marina, the wife, would also testify that LHO and his mother did not get along and suggested after a month that they should move into their own apartment. LHO started working as a sheet metal worker, lied on his application, and that he had the experience, also said that he was honorably discharged from the Marines. Of course, he was not. Marina also said later he did not like his job, but was regarded as a good employee until he quit. Others said that at the job he was quiet and kept to himself. The Oswald family moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area after he decided he did not want his mother visiting them anymore. So he moved like far away enough where she couldn't just like pop in and visit. So obviously there was some issues there. And I mean, indicated too, like as a child, if he always felt that his mother wasn't loving enough.
Yeah, it's not going to get better in adulthood.
No.
So
once they moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, LHO would not see his mother again until after the JFK assassination. I mean, a couple years, right?
He's a grown-ass man. He's got his own wife.
Yeah.
He has kids. It shouldn't be about his mother anymore. Like, he needs to move on. Like, come on now.
Witnesses say that their apartment in Dallas was quote-unquote decrepit, and that they were poorly clothed with scarce furniture, and there was no bed for the baby.
Oh my God, that's terrible. That's not good.
They were like on and off of welfare, in unemployment, and he tries to scam the system a lot, and I'm going to get into some of that. In August 1962, LHO had a follow-up interview with the FBI who asked him about his reasons for moving to the USSR. He denied being a spy for the Soviets and protested his undesirable discharge from the military. However, he did appear less hostile than in previous interviews that he had with the FBI. It's like he got calmer the more they started talking to him. And it's common for them to re-interview after so many months.
Right.
Marina also stated that LHO was upset how interested the FBI was in him and his activities. But it's like, I mean, it's, well, duh. You're just going to defect to the Soviet Union after being in the military. So he didn't do himself any favors. The Oswalds became friends with many Russian-speaking Dallas population, composed primarily of people from Russia and Eastern Europe. They would socialize at gatherings and dinner meetings, many of the same people with the same commonalities. Of course, his wife was also a Soviet. Most people in the Russian community were interested in the Oswalds due to their recency, like they had been in the United States for so long that they hadn't gone back. And this was kind of like the beginning of the Cold War era too, so freedom of movement probably wouldn't have been very easy without being watched. So they wanted to talk to the Oswalds. Allegedly, this community helped them also with clothing, groceries, transportation in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. This, however, would make LHO furious to be provided for. And on at least one occasion, he went into a rage about not needing any of the things the Russian community was providing for them. They liked Marina, but they tolerated LHO. This would also overflow into their marriage, and people would claim they would see Marina with a black eye. When questioned about it, Marina said she walked into a door, of course. However, she did confide in Marguerite, LHO's mother, that LHO had struck her. And in her testimony after he died, Marina said, quote, "Immediately after coming to the United States, Lee changed. I did not know him as such a man in Russia. He helped me as before, but he became a little bit more of a recluse. He was very irritable and sometimes a trifle," end quote. They would separate, and Marina would stay in Fort Worth and LHO would move to Dallas. LHO went to the Texas Employment Commission in Dallas in search of a job. His counselors said that LHO came into the office and was reluctant to gain employment in the industrial business, but would rather do clerical work. This may have been common, that LHO was kind of like just a clerk. I don't know if you ever heard that. And actually, our chatter Tom mentioned this, saying that he was a clerk. How can a clerk be such a good rifleman? Well, he actually did well, shooting at the range, but he did become a clerk afterwards.
Right.
And he worked at a school book repository.
Right.
During the assassination. So on October 11th, my birthday, he was referred to Jagger's Chili Stovall Company, a graphics art company, in response to a call from John Graff, a photographic department of the company, who told the Employment Commission he needed a photo print trainee. So through this employment company or whatever, trying to get you work, he was picked over other applicants, so he apparently made a good impression. And on the following day, he began working in his new position as a trainee, making prints of advertising materials for approximately $1.35 an hour.
Oh my God. When was this? This was
1962.
Okay.
Now, the Oswalds would rekindle. They settled in Dallas in an apartment in late October 1962. But this would not last long. LHO was witnessed slapping Marina because she didn't have a zipper on her dress completely closed. It wasn't closed all the way up, so he hit her.
Oh my Lord.
They also argued over Marina being quote-unquote allowed to smoke. There was another fight when LHO told their landlady that Marina was from Czechoslovakia, not the Soviet Union, in which Marina became very upset. And she went to the landlady, clarified, "I'm from Soviet Union, not Czechoslovakia." And then that pissed LHO off, so they got into another quarrel. But after this, she moved out again, moved in with her friend, ultimately deciding she would never return to her husband. When LHO would visit her, Marina testified that, quote, "I saw him cry. He begged me to come back, asked my forgiveness, and promised he would try to improve. If only I would come back," end quote. On another occasion, she said, quote, "He cried, and a woman's heart, I went back to him. He said he didn't care to live if I didn't return," end quote. So that same day, after he threatened to kill himself, she decided to return to him, as most narcissistic manipulator men do. The Russian community who had helped Marina like during their separations, like she would stay with some of them while they were separated. They felt that their efforts were kind of in vain. So one of the families Marina had stayed with testified that Marina contemplated suicide during this period because LHO was treating her so bad. She had no friends. She felt there was no way out. Marina did acknowledge this when she was asked about it later after LHO had died.
Okay.
LHO often wrote to the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., and on one occasion asked how to subscribe to Russian periodicals and for bulletins which you could put out for the benefit of citizens living for a time in the United States. So these are just some of the actions where, like, he's continually, like, demonstrating his belief in the communism system, right? Yeah. In December 1962, the Soviet embassy received a card in Russian signed Marina and Lee Oswald, which conveyed New Year's greetings and wishes for health, success, and all the best to the employees at the Russian embassy in DC. They continued to correspond with acquaintances in Russia as well. Soon after his return to the U.S., he started to correspond with the Communist Party USA and the Socialist Workers' Party. So these were like groups that were kind of, I don't say anti-government, but were trying to kind of establish different parties in the United States. He wrote additional literature from these organizations and attempted to join the Socialist Workers' Party, which, however, had no branch in Texas. He sent samples of his photographic artwork to the Socialist Workers' Party, the Worker, and the Hall Davis Defense Committee, and offered to aid them in printing photographic work in connection with the posters, like basically, like, I'll help you advertise. These offers were not accepted. Marina said that he read books of historical nature to include H.G. Wells' 2-volume Outline of History and biographies of Hitler, Kennedy, and Khrushchev. Khrushchev?
Okay. I don't know who that is.
The Oswalds moved out of their Elizabeth Street apartment on March 3rd, 1963 to an upstairs apartment several blocks away at the 214 West Neely Street. Marina preferred the Neely Street apartment because it had a porch and she felt it was more suitable for June, their daughter, not the month. In April 1963, Marina was invited to a picnic by a friend, Ruth Payne, and recalled the following. Quote, "One day we were invited to a friend's house where I met Ruth Payne, who was studying Russian here in America and wanted to improve her conversational knowledge. We began to see each other. Ruth would come to see me with her children. This was very good for both me and for June. She was growing up alone and becoming terribly wild, so the company of other children was good for her. Sometimes we went out on picnics at a nearby lake. Lee loved to fish and would look and rejoice if he caught a little fish. Several times we went to visit Ruth, who lived in Irving, Texas." This really comes into play later. Marina also confided in Ruth during this picnic that they were expecting their second child. So LHO was known to use the name Alec James Heidel on identification cards, which probably were produced at the Jaggers Chili Stovall Company, where he'd made these like advertising, photographic advertisements, right? One of his fellow employees taught him various photographic techniques, which he could have used to prepare not only these cards, but also samples of his work, which he sent to various communist, socialist-related parties. Using this name, LHO ordered a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver from Los Angeles on a form which was dated January 27th, and a rifle on March 12th from Klein Sporting Goods in Chicago. Over the weekend of March 9th and 10th, 1963, LHO conducted recon at the home of Major General Edwin Walker, a forced-to-retire U.S. Army commander who was a known anti-communist and white supremacist. LHO photographed an alley of the rear Walker's home and nearby railroad tracks, basically as a way to like just take pictures of kind of how he's going to plan, right? He planned to shoot General Walker. LHO's first attempt on the evening of April 6th or 7th, however, he changed his plans. He hid his rifle nearby and he was determined to act on it the following Wednesday. So on April 10th, a nearby church was planning a meeting which LHO reasoned he would use to create a diversion that would help him escape. So on that day, April 10th, LHO left a note for Marina telling her what to do if he were apprehended. He retrieved his rifle, he fired at Walker, but the bullet narrowly missed Walker's head. LHO hid his rifle again and took the bus home. When Oswald told Marina what he had done, she became angry. She made him promise to never repeat such an act. She testified that she kept his letter, intending to give it to the authorities if he repeated the attempt. LHO told Marina he was sorry and that he had missed Walker, and said that the shooting of Walker would have been parallel to an assassination of Hitler.
Oh.
And chatters, that's where we're going to end it. We got a lot of backstory on Lee Harvey Oswald, probably a lot that you guys didn't know.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of sympathies to Russia. Not quite 100% happy with the Communist Party, but definitely not happy with, the capitalists in the United States, trying to kind of find his way. We've got an assassination attempt already. There's
problem.
so a lot of mommy issues.
A lot of mommy commitment issues.
Issues with the wife. Now we got another baby on the way.
Oh, yeah. Things are boiling over now.
Things are boiling over. So we'll pick it up a little bit more kind of on his inability also to hold a job. And then we'll talk about really some of the other events. Now, keep in mind, he bought a pistol and a rifle using this other pseudonym name.
Right.
As Alex Heidel. A lot of that's going to come into play next week as well.
Okay. All right, chatter.
So it's a lot. It's very historical. Super interesting read. All of the stuff, all 11,000 plus documents you can find at the archives, and all of it's like scanned in. But I am going to found a ton of pictures to include LHO's autopsy pictures.
Oh, cool.
That are public. So we're gonna put those on the Patreon. Tons of pictures. Also, Jack Ruby, we'll talk a lot about him next week. He was the one who killed Lee Harvey Oswald in the basement of the police department. Yeah, so a lot more to get into, especially in the actual assassination. We'll get into the conspiracies and all that stuff next week.
Yeah. Hey there, chatters. I'm Nat.
And I'm Kat, and welcome to the Crime Chat. I am your forensic femme fatale, and Natalie is your true crime addict connoisseur.
We're just two girls who obsess about dark crimes, evil minds, and occasionally the unknown, and haven't stopped since last week.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we haven't stopped.
Can't stop, won't stop.
Won't stop.
We are recording both part 1 and part 2 in the same day.
Yeah, and you travel. I mean, you've been traveling, girl. You went from Alaska to now you're in Florida.
I'm somewhere with palm trees in my video background. I'm playing with all the virtual backgrounds, so. Here's your disclaimer, chatters. The following crime chat contains adult content and descriptions of potentially violent scenarios. Your listener discretion is advised.
Yes, and today is part 2 of Kat's story, Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yes. Yes. We're going to go ahead and just dive right in.
Okay.
Are you ready? Okay. So last week we talked about a lot of the history leading up to Lee Harvey Oswald, his favoritism towards communism, and we're going to continue kind of on that same theme. He married a Soviet citizen. They have a daughter and another one on the way. And he did an assassination attempt on General Walker, who is anti-communist, white supremacist, forced to retire U.S. Army general. Basically, he was very outspoken. His beliefs did not align with the government line, essentially, if you will. So he was forced to retire. And that's where we left off last time, was the Lee Harvey Oswald's assassination attempt on General Walker.
Yes, a lot of background. So if you haven't heard that one yet, I would stop this one and go straight to that one first, because there's a lot of background on who Lee Harvey Oswald was. I did not know all that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. And I'm obviously still kind of nasally and fighting a flu. I've got some tea I made, and I'm going to be sipping on some tea as we get into this. All right, so we ended in March 1962. Well, in April, actually, 1962. That's when the assassination attempt was on General Walker. So later, in April of 1963, Marina's friend Ruth was somebody studying Russian in America, became very close with Marina, LHO's wife, and Marina's friend Ruth was visiting Marina and was surprised to see Lee Harvey Oswald, I also refer to him as LHO, packing his bags. He told her he was unable to find work in Dallas and decided to move back to Nolens, which is where he was born. He had family still there. He was able to stay with an aunt, and while in New Orleans, he called all of the Oswalds in the phone book. Remember the phone book and payphones?
Yes.
Right? He found the widow of his father's brother, so his uncle's widow, who gave him a picture of his father, Robert Sr., and told LHO that as far as she knew, the rest of the family was dead. So he had no other relatives or anything like that. On April 26, 1963, LHO began his search for employment in the New Orleans area. He went to the employment office in the Louisiana Department of Labor and stated he was qualified as a commercial photographer, shipping clerk, and a darkroom man. Remember when actual pictures pictures when they put him in the dark room and put him in the water. None of this digital stuff yet. The interviewer noted on Oswald's application card, quote, will travel on limited basis, will relocate, minimum $1.25 an hour, neat, suit, tie, polite, end quote. LHO wrote to Marina while he was in New Orleans, and she was back in Texas staying with Ruth. All is well. I'm living with Aunt Lillian. She has very kindly taken us in, and I'm now looking for work. When I find it, I will write you. And on May 3rd, he wrote to Marina and Ruth Payne, Marina's friend Ruth. Girls, I have not found work, but I received money from the unemployment office in the amount of $15 to $20. They were mistaken in the Dallas office when they refused, but I straightened everything out. Uncle Diaz offered me a loan of $200 if needed. Great, huh? End quote. And on May 9th, responding to a newspaper advertisement, LHO completed an application for employment with the William B. Riley Company, Incorporated, an enterprise engaged in the roasting, grinding, canning, bagging, and sale of coffee. In late May and early June, Oswald had apparently begun to formulate plans creating a New Orleans branch of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Again, he's very sympathetic to Communist Party. Using the name Lee Osborne, he ordered a number of printed circulars demanding, quote-unquote, hands off Cuba in large letters, and application forms and membership cards for the proposed chapter. During the same period, LHO began to reconsider returning to the Soviet Union or moving to Cuba. On June 24th, he applied for a new passport, which he received the following day. I don't know how back then you could get a passport like that. Like, you know, it takes like 3 months to get a passport now.
I got mine in a week.
Oh, wow, you did?
Yeah.
But now, had it expired?
10 years. No, I mean, when I first got it, when I was 20-something, I got it, and it was like a week.
And wow.
It was quick back before pre-9/11, it was pretty quick.
Yeah. At LHO's request, Marina wrote to the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., expressing a desire to return to Russia and indicating that she would be accompanied by her husband, Lee Harvey Oswald. She explained that she wanted to return because of family problems, including the impending birth of her second child. Accompanying her letter was a letter written by LHO dated July 1st, in which he asked the embassy to rush an entrance visa for his wife and requested that his visa be considered separately. Marina believed that LHO was really planning to go only to Cuba. She testified that, quote, his basic desire was to get to Cuba by any means and that all the rest of it was window dressing for that purpose, end quote. On July 6th, LHO's cousin, Eugene Murrett, who was studying to be a Jesuit priest in Mobile, Alabama, wrote and asked Oswald if he would come to Mobile and speak at the Jesuit House of Studies about, quote, contemporary Russia and the practice of communism there, end quote. On July 19th, Oswald was let go by the coffee company because of insufficiency and inattention to his work. He spent many of his work hours next door at the Crescent City Garage where he read gun magazines and discussed guns with one of the owners, Adrian Alba. On July 22nd, Oswald again visited the Louisiana Employment Office to seek new employment and file a claim for unemployment compensation. Thereafter, he collected unemployment compensation weekly and, although apparently making some effort to obtain another job, again listed a number of fictitious job applications on his employment compensation claim form. So basically, he lied saying, I applied for these many jobs and I haven't been hired, so he continued to get unemployment. He soon gave up his search for employment and began to spend his days at home reading. He received another setback on July 25th when he was notified that in response to the request for review which was made in 1962, his undesirable discharge from the Marine Corps had been upheld. So he was requesting to have it changed. And they said, nope. Oswald did end up accepting his cousin's invitation to go to Mobile, Alabama, and speak at the Jesuit House of Studies. And on July 27th, he and his family, joined by some of the Murretts, some of his other, distant cousin families, and they traveled to Mobile, and the Murretts paid for all the expenses. LHO spoke concerning his observations in Russia and conducted a question and answer period. He impressed his listeners as being articulate, which is interesting. He indicated that he had become disillusioned during his stay in Russia. It is, in his opinion, the best political system would be one combining the best points of capitalism and the best points of communism. He also left his listeners with the impression that he was an atheist, since he avoided direct discussion of religion. The group, including the Oswalds and the Murretts, returned to New Orleans on July 28th. The next week, August 5th, LHO visited a store managed by Carlos Bringuier, a Cuban refugee and avid opponent of Castro, and the New Orleans delegate of the Cuban Student Directorate. LHO indicated an interest in joining the struggle against Castro, and he told Bringuier that he had been a Marine and was trained in guerrilla warfare, and he was willing to not only train Cubans to fight Castro, but also join the fight himself, which is interesting because he was pro-communism.
Right.
Well, sort of. Like I said, somewhere kind of in the middle. A couple days later, on August 9th, Bringuier saw LHO passing out the Fair Play for Cuba leaflets that he had created in the month prior, and as a result, result, LHO and the 3 Cuban exiles who were helping him were arrested for disturbing the peace. Because he's basically like, so on one hand, he's telling Bringuier, I'll fight against Castro, but he's passing out these leaflets saying, leave Cuba alone.
Right.
So he's contradicting himself.
Right.
So as a result, LHO and the 3 Cuban exiles were arrested for disturbing the peace. He spent the night in jail and was interviewed the next day by a lieutenant of the New Orleans Police Department. And at LHO's request, an FBI agent also interviewed him, which is interesting because he was not happy the FBI was so interested in him. LHO maintained that he was a member of the New Orleans branch for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which he claimed had 35 members. He stated he also had been in touch with the president of that organization, A.J. Heidel. Does that sound familiar? Heidel? Alec. He used that name to purchase the pistol and the rifle. Yeah. So he was saying that the president of this organization, this Alec Heidel, he had been in touch with him, but Alec Heidel was LHO. So, in fact, LHO was the only member of this New Orleans branch. He had never been chartered by the National Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and later that day, LHO was released on bail. 2 days later, he pled guilty to the charges and paid a $10 fine for disturbing the peace. The charges against the Cuban exiles were dismissed, and Marina testified later, after his passing, that the arrest upset LHO and that he became less active in, the pro-Cuban community and, quote-unquote, cooled off for a little bit. So August 16th, all of these dates, July, August, September that we're getting into, is getting up into November of 1963, which is why I'm putting all the dates in here. So on August 16th, LHO was assisted by at least one other person who was a hired help, and again began to pass out these Fair Play for Cuba literature, this time in front of the International Trade Mart. That night, television newscasts ran picture of Oswald's activities on the local television network, which hindered his subsequent attempts to gain employment, so he says. He didn't really try to gain work, he was just trying to scam and get unemployment. So William Stuckey, a radio broadcaster with a program called Latin Listening Post, learned about LHO from Bringuier, the Cuban exile, or the Cuban refugee who owned this shop, and subsequently visited LHO on August 17th. Stuckey recorded an interview with LHO, which was cut to about 5 minutes, and played back on the show that evening on the radio. 2 days later, Stuckey asked the news director of the station if he could run the entire tape, but the director felt the debate with a local opponent of Castro would be greater public interest. So, the producer or whatever was trying to kind of get both sides of the story. Consequently, Stuckey arranged for a debate between LHO and Bringuier, this Cuban refugee. On a 25-minute daily public affairs program called Conversation Carte Blanche, which took place on August 21st. So, he's putting himself out there. Yeah. LHO defended the Castro regime, even though he told Bringuier when he first met him, I'll fight against Castro. He's now defending the Castro regime and discussed Marxism. He was put on the defensive when his defection to Russia was brought up, and Stuckey later testified that he thought the airing of his program had finished the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans, basically that it was not going to be anymore. However, Stuckey also testified that Oswald seemed to be a clean-cut and intelligent person who conducted himself very well during the interviews and debates. Sometime in August 1963, Marina Oswald testified later that LHO told her of his plans to go to Mexico, and then from Mexico to Cuba, where he planned to stay. He was wanting to now defect to Cuba, which Marina consistently opposed against him. Don't do that. On September 17th, he obtained from the Mexican Consulate General in New Orleans a tourist card, which was good for one journey to Mexico, no longer than 15 days, which was like a temporary visa, kinda. And on the application, LHO stated he was employed at 640 Rampart. He was, in fact, of course, unemployed at this time. Marina and June, their daughter, departed with her friend Ruth for Irving, Texas on the morning of September 23rd, 1963. Before she left, LHO told Marina that she should not tell anyone about his pending trip to Mexico. Marina kept this secret until after the assassination. His true intentions of why he was going to Mexico. We're actually going to get into those details here in a second. While Ruth's car was being packed, their landlady asked if they were moving or if they were leaving because their rent was 15 days late. LHO said that Marina was leaving, but he was staying. On September 24th, however, LHO left for Mexico, and then the landlady found an empty apartment September 25th.
Oh my God.
After a 20-hour bus ride, LHO registered at Hotel de Comercio within an hour of his arrival to Mexico City. He stayed there throughout his visit. Now, after he had registered at the hotel, he promptly turned into the task of trying to gain permission to enter Cuba from Mexico. Mexican officials would not permit a U.S. citizen without a Cuban visa to board a plane for Cuba. He visited the Cuban embassy on September 27th in Mexico City and spoke with a Senora Silvia Tiradado de Duran, a Mexican citizen employed there. Senora Duran later made a signed statement to the Mexican police that Lee Harvey Oswald, quote, applied for a visa to Cuba to transit to Russia and based his application on his presentation of his passport, in which it was recorded that he had been living in the latter country for a period of 3 years, saying that he had been living in Mexico for 3 years, which was not true. His work permit from the same country, written in the same language, as well as proof of being married to a woman of Russian nationality, being apparent director in the city of New Orleans of the Organization for the quote-unquote Fair Play of Cuba, with the desire that he should be accepted as a friend of the Cuban Revolution, end quote. Now, again, she's a Mexican citizen working for the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. So LHO apparently stated he was a member of the Communist Party and displayed documents which he claimed to be evidence of his membership. He said he intended to go to Cuba on September 30th and remain there for 2 weeks or longer if possible, and then go on to Russia. And again, he's trying to defect again, right? Senora Duran took down the relevant date and filled out the appropriate application. LHO then visited the Soviet embassy in Mexico City to obtain a Soviet visa, but it was denied. So he's like trying to skirt the system in any which way that he possibly can to ultimately get back to Russia.
He also has 2 children he's running from. What the hell?
His second daughter isn't born just yet. She's actually born right before the assassination.
Oh my God.
So after being turned away from the Soviet embassy, he returned to the Cuban embassy, now still in Mexico City, later that afternoon, and this time he brought passport photographs which may have been obtained in the United States. Senora Duran telephoned then the Soviet embassy and was like, hey, you know this LHO guy? Are you going to give him a visa? And was told that there would be delay for about 4 months. It was going to take some time. LHO became, quote, highly agitated and angry, end quote, particularly when he learned he could not obtain an in-transit visa to Cuba before acquiring a Russian visa. So basically, Senora Duran at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City said, we're not going to give you a Cuban visa to transit through Cuba to get to Russia until your Russia visa is approved. And they just said it was going to take 4 months. Okay. So he gets all pissed off. Senora Duran called the Cuban consul, Esquivo Esquize, I don't know how to say that, pardon my Espanol. The discussion between Oswald and Ezequiel developed into a heated argument, which of course gets everybody anything that they want, right? And it ended when Ezequiel told LHO that in his opinion, people like LHO who were harming the Cuban Revolution, and that as far as Ezequiel was concerned, he would never give LHO a visa. Senora Duran wrote her name and the phone number of the embassy on a piece of paper, which she gave to Oswald in case he wished to contact her again. He copied this information in his address book, which again can be found on the National Archives. Senora Duran forwarded the Cuban visa application to Havana. In Cuba, the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs replied on October 15th that the visa could only be issued after he obtained a Russian visa. Again, like they were steadfast. They didn't change at all. Okay. He contacted the Russian and Cuba embassies again during his stay in Mexico. Now, he was there for 2 weeks, remember. He had no greater success than he had before. So on Monday, September 30th, Oswald began to prepare for his return to the United States. Marina testified that when he returned to Texas, he was convinced that his trip had been a failure and disappointed in having been unable to go to Cuba. However, LHO did not contact his wife immediately when he went back to Dallas. Like, she's staying in Irving, Texas with her friend Ruth, right? So he gets back to Dallas. Yeah. He automatically went to the Employment Commission, filed for unemployment, and announced that he was again looking for work. He spent the night at the YMCA where he registered as a serviceman in order to avoid paying a membership fee. On the following day, he applied for a job as a typesetter trainee in the Paget Printing Company, made a favorable impression on the department, but the plant superintendent who called Jagger's Chili Stovall Company that he worked for as a photo advertising person, they called, of course, as reference and decided not to hire him because of unfavorable responses. Don't be a shitbag. Yeah. So he hitchhiked from Dallas to Irving to visit with Marina in June, but would return to Dallas to continue to looking for work while Marina stayed with Ruth and Ruth's children. Ruth testified that LHO was extremely discouraged because his wife was expecting a baby, he had no job, no prospects in sight, no longer had any source of income, which, I mean, just in general, that would be extremely discouraging, right? So Ruth helped him in gaining employment at the Texas School Book Depository in Dallas, Texas. where he would fill school book orders. October 20th, 1963, it was a Sunday. He stayed with the Payne children, Ruth's children, and his daughter, while Ruth drove Marina to go give birth to their second baby. I mean, it was the 60s, but still.
It's not shocking. I mean, it's for this guy, it's not shocking at all. I mean, I get it's disappointing that he had a baby on the way and he had no source of income, but the man was super resourceful. So he was just not willing to adhere to rules, social, you know, what's acceptable. So, yeah.
So second daughter, Rachel, was born Audrey Marina Rachel Oswald, October 20th, 1963. LHO went to work on that next Monday to the Texas School Book Repository, but that evening visited Marina in the hospital, spent the night in Irving that Monday night, and Marina wrote, quote, Monday evening, Lee visited me in the hospital. He was very happy at the birth of another daughter and even wept a little. He said that 2 daughters were better for each other, 2 sisters. He stayed with me for about 2 hours, end quote. So that Tuesday morning, he returned to Dallas, and on the evening of October 23rd, he attended an ultra-right meeting headed by no other than General Edwin Walker. Full circle. Like, why would you attempt to kill this person and then, 6 months later, attend a meeting where he's speaking? Right. I don't know. This guy is like,
I tried to kill you, but I didn't mean it.
I'm sorry. 2 evenings after this, he accompanied Michael Payne, Ruth's ex-husband, at a meeting for the American Civil Liberties Union held at a Southern Methodist university. Later in the evening, Oswald became involved in a discussion with several people, including Frank Kristnick, who was employed with Michael Payne at the Bell helicopter plant. During this conversation, Oswald expressed Marxist views again and declared that he was a Marxist, although denying that he was a communist. He admitted that the United States was superior to the Soviet Union in the area of civil liberties, of course, because Soviet Union is a suppressed society.
Right.
And he actually praised President Kennedy for his work in that connection. Now, this is a month out before the man killed him.
I don't believe a thing he says anymore.
And that's why I'm giving such a background to this, because he's all over the fucking place.
Right. Wow.
Now, Frank Kristnick, the man that he had a conversation with, testified later that he got the impression that Lee Harvey Oswald did not fully understand the views that he was expounding. He was just blah, like spitting shit out, whatever sounded good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So through this period, the FBI had been aware of his whereabouts of the Oswalds. There was a record in the Dallas office of the FBI that Lee Harvey Oswald subscribed to The Worker, engaged in Fair Play for Cuba Committee activities, and had traveled to Mexico. So they followed him. They knew he had gone to Mexico. An FBI agent visited the Payne home twice in November of 1963 and spoke briefly with Ruth.
Okay.
LHO was not present on either one of these occasions. So she would say, hey, FBI agent came and wanted to talk to you. And LHO declared that the FBI was trying to inhibit his activities, and he wrote to the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. And now I'm going to read this verbatim, and I'll put this on here because this is just an example of his literary abilities. The Federal Bureau is misspelled, of Investigation is now interested in activities in the progressive organization Fair Play for Cuba Committee, of which I was secretary in New Orleans, state Louisiana, since I no longer reside in that state. However, the FBI has misspelled us here in Dallas on November 1st. Agent James P. Hasty warned me that if I engage in FPCC, Fair Play for Cuba Committee, activities in Texas, the FBI will again take an interest in me. This agent also suggested to Marina Nakchikavaya, I don't know where that name came from, that she could remain in the United States under FBI protection. That is, she could defect from the United States, of course, no R, in course. I and my wife strongly protested these tactics by the notorious FBI. Please inform us of our arrival of Soviet entrance visas soon as they come, end quote. Now, Marina testified that the statements, both by and to the FBI agents, to which her husband referred to in this letter, were in fact never made. They was completely made up. I don't know if it was a way for him to kind of expedite these visas or, I don't understand his motive behind that. Don't you think they're going to fact check that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean,
I don't know.
He's one of those people that, it's hard to fact check him because he's always lying.
Yeah. So over Veterans Day holiday weekend, LHO stayed with his family in Ruth's home in Irving, Texas, and Ruth actually taught him how to drive. Now, this man is in his 30s and he doesn't know how to drive. He wanted to return the following weekend, but Marina told LHO she didn't want to abuse Ruth's hospitality since he was just there for the holiday weekend, he was there for the long weekend. So on November 17th, Marina asked Ruth to call her husband at the home where he said he was renting a room in Dallas. When she called and asked for Lee Harvey Oswald, she was told nobody by the name lived there. The following day, LHO called Marina and said that she was upset by what Ruth told her because Ruth said she tried to call you and there was nobody by that name there. He was like, I'm using a fictitious name, and you should not have called me.
Oh my God.
It was probably that Alec Heidel name. Probably. I don't know. I couldn't find that, or I wasn't able to locate it. So on the morning of November 21st, the day before the Kennedy assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald asked a coworker, Wesley Frazier, to take him to Irving, and that he wanted to pick up curtain rods. Have you heard the curtain rod thing?
I'm not sure.
Okay. LHO's arrival was a surprise, as he normally asked permission before going to visit. I mean, understandably so, right? The hospitality. So both Marina and Ruth thought LHO felt bad about the fictitious name, and then the argument that ensued after. He said that he was lonely and wanted to come make his peace. This weekend, LHO asked Marina to move to Dallas with him, but she refused. Days before the president's arrival to Dallas, several local newspapers published the route Kennedy would take, which would include passing by the Texas School Book Depository. On the day of the assassination, November 22nd, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald and Wesley, his friend that he worked with, returned to Dallas from Irving, Texas. LHO left his wedding ring, but took a large paper bag with him. Wesley testified that LHO told him in the paper bag contained curtain rods. However, it was the rifle that he would use to assassinate the president.
Oh.
So he's like, hey, Wesley, can you take me to Irving? I want to go see my family and I need to buy curtain rods.
Curtain rods, like a code name for a gun?
No, it was just a story.
Oh, okay.
It was just a lie because he was actually going back to the house to get the rifle.
Got it.
Another one of LHO's co-workers, Charles Givens, testified the last time he saw LHO was on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Repository at approximately 11:15 a.m., just 35 minutes before the motorcade entered the Dealey Plaza. The investigation would state that LHO was not seen again until 20 minutes after the assassination, reading a newspaper on the 1st floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Several coworkers accounted for LHO's whereabouts on the 1st floor following the assassination. However, one coworker, Bonnie Ray Williams, said he was eating his lunch on the 6th floor and did not see anyone there, including LHO. One of the secretaries of the Texas School Book Depository testified she saw a man believed to be LHO standing on the 1st floor hallway just prior to the assassination. So there's a lot of different type of witnesses saying he was there, he wasn't there. As Kennedy's motorcade passed through Dealey Plaza at approximately 12:30 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963, LHO fired 3 rifle shots from the southeast corner window on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, killing the president, seriously wounding Texas Governor John Conley. One shot apparently missed the presidential limousine entirely, another struck Kennedy and Conley, and a third bullet struck Kennedy in the head, killing him. Bystander James Tague received a minor facial injury from a small piece of curbstone that had fragmented after it was struck by one of the bullets. The paper bag Wesley Frazier had described was found by police near the open 6th floor window from which LHO was determined to have fired. It was 38 inches long, had marks on the inside consistent with having been used to carry a rifle. The Maligner Caracno rifle and 3 shell casings were also found near the window on the 6th floor. So they found the shell casings. According to the investigations, after the shooting, LHO covered the rifle with boxes and descended via the rear stairwell. About 90 seconds after the shot sounded, he was encountered in the 2nd floor lunchroom by Dallas police officer Marianne Baker, who was with LHO's supervisor, Roy Truly. Baker let LHO pass after Truly identified him as an employee. Baker said LHO did not seem nervous or out of breath. Roy Truly, the supervisor, said that LHO looked startled when Baker pointed his gun directly at him. So, like, the shots fired, the supervisor and this police officer are in the building.
Right.
Apparently startle Lee Harvey Oswald.
Okay.
At about 12:40 p.m., LHO boarded a city bus, and likely due to heavy traffic, he requested a transfer from the driver and got off 2 blocks later. LHO then took a taxi cab to his rooming house on 1026 North Beckley Avenue, entered in through the front door about 1 p.m., but he did not stay put. Now, he might have gotten away with it if he would just stayed in the house. But a roommate would testify that LHO left every few minutes and finally saw LHO standing outside at a bus stop, this time wearing a zipped-up jacket. So he was like, he walked out of the house, walked back in the house, walked out of the house, walked back in the house, but the final time he put a coat on and he went out to the bus stop. About 15 minutes later, Dallas patrolman J.D. Tippett pulled up to LHO in his patrol car, presumably because of the physical description that was broadcasted from a witness who saw the shots being fired at Kennedy in his motorcade. After a brief exchange of words, Tippett exited his car and LHO immediately fired his pistol 4 times, killing Tippett. At approximately 1:40 p.m., a witness saw a man slipping into the Texas Theater without paying, who alerted the ticket clerk and then called police. Police responded and approached LHO, who seemed ready to turn himself in, saying, quote, "Well, it's all over now," end quote. As LHO stood up, he pulled the pistol out of his front pants and pulled the trigger. However, the pistol did not fire. because LHO's hand was stuck between the hammer and the firing pin. So if you think of a revolver, you know, the firing. After a brief altercation, LHO was apprehended while shouting he was a victim of police brutality. Now, we've got his mugshots, too, that I'm going to put on the Patreon. It shows him beat up a little bit. LHO was interrogated several times in the 2 days following the assassination. He admitted to going home, changing his clothes several times after the assassination, and adamantly denied killing Kennedy or Tippit, denied owning a rifle, denied knowing any A.J. Heidel, even though police showed him a copy of his selective service card that said the name Alec James Heidel. And I've got copies of those as well.
Okay, cool.
During another interrogation, LHO was asked, "Are you a communist?" He replied, "No, I am not a communist. I'm a Marxist." During his last interrogation, November 24th, 1963, according to a postal inspector, Harry Holmes, LHO was again asked where he was at the time of the shooting. Holmes testified that LHO replied he was working on an upper floor when the shooting occurred, then went downstairs where he encountered Dallas Motorcycle Patrolman Baker with his supervisor. On the same day, detectives were escorting LHO through the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters toward an armored car that was to take him from the city jail. At 11:21 a.m., Dallas nightclub operator Jack Ruby approached LHO from the side of the crowd and shot him in the abdomen at close range. I've got pictures of because there's media out there, so there's actual pictures of Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald.
Really?
And I'm gonna put those on there too.
Okay.
As the shot rang out, the police detective recognized Ruby and exclaimed, "Jack, you son of a bitch!" The crowd outside the headquarters applauded when they heard that Lee Harvey Oswald was shot. Unconscious, Lee Harvey Oswald was taken by ambulance to Parkland Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where Kennedy was pronounced dead 2 days earlier. LHO died at 1:07 p.m., and at 2:45 p.m. an autopsy was performed. That was like this.
Yeah.
That's very fast. Dallas County Medical Examiner Earl Rose announced the results of the gross autopsy, saying, quote, "The two things that we could determine were, first, that he died from a hemorrhage from a gunshot wound, and that otherwise was a physically healthy male. Rose's examination found that the bullet entered Oswald's left side from the front part of the abdomen, caused damage to his spleen, stomach, aorta, vena cava, kidney, liver, diaphragm, and 11th rib before coming to rest on his right side."
That sounds painful.
I don't want to get shot in the belly.
No.
All those organs and stuff around there.
That's painful. Oh.
The funeral home had great difficulty finding a cemetery willing to accept Oswald's remains. And eventually, Reverend Lewis Saunders of the Fort Worth Council of Churches volunteered, saying that, quote, "Someone had to help this family," end quote.
They couldn't just get him cremated? Send them home with them?
I don't know that they did that, and I don't know that his mother or his brother wanted his remains. I mean, would you?
No.
If your brother assassinated the president?
No. No. No.
He performed a brief graveside service under heavy guard on November 25th, which was the next day, which, this was, fast.
Yeah.
Reporters covering the burial were asked to act as pallbearers because there was nobody that went, of course. So in 1979, fast forward 16 years, the Investigation Review Board prepared to issue a statement saying that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. However, a recording was produced where you could hear before, during, and after the shooting. Analysis of this indicated more than 3 gunshots, and there were high probability of at least 2 gunmen. As of 1982, the acoustic evidence, however, has been discredited, saying that the evidence was seriously flawed. In a Science and Justice article, the author D.B. Thomas wrote the entire investigation itself was flawed. He concluded with 96.3% certainty, which is very specific, that at least 2 gunmen fired at Kennedy's motorcade, and at least 1 came from the grassy knoll. In 2005, fast forward again, 30 years, Thomas's conclusions were rebutted in the same journal. Ralph Linsker and several members of the National Academy of Sciences reanalyzed the audio, and the timings of the recordings reaffirmed the earlier conclusion from 1982. However, D.B. Thomas, who wrote the original article saying that it was flawed, rebutted that same year and restated that his conclusion that there were at least 2 gunmen. So, kind of getting into the JFK, early 90s, now early 2000s, right?
Right.
Some critics have proposed several other theories, not just the conspiracy theory with LHO and a second gunman, but also witnesses' intimidation, evidence tampering, fabrication of evidence and information, and questioning of the actual timeline of events. Of course, there's the Tin Man or Badge Man on the grassy knoll, who appeared to be wearing a police uniform, but was determined it was somebody impersonating a police officer, this person on the grassy knoll. Then there's the Umbrella Man theory, who was a man who was holding an open umbrella as the motorcade went by, even though it wasn't raining. The conspiracy proposed that the umbrella was a weapon, like in spy movies, or that it was a signal for a hidden gunman. The umbrella man ended up coming forward and said that he brought the umbrella as a way to protest Kennedy's policies. It was just like a non-threatening way to protest, I guess. Okay. And was likely the epitome of being at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
I mentioned a Gallup poll in 2001, right? A later Gallup poll taken in mid-November 2013 showed 61% believed Kennedy was killed as a result of a conspiracy, and only 30% people think Oswald acted alone. What do you think, Chatters?
I believe the grassy knoll.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do. I think there were people in position to hit to make sure that he was dead.
But there were no other casings that were found anywhere.
I don't believe
the 3 casings were found on the 6th floor.
That could have been I don't know. Like, I just don't. I think that we're talking about the death of a president. I think it's suspicious of how fast that man went from death to in the ground. I think it's suspicious.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many things here. Like, I just think but yet Kennedy's body was in the autopsy room for longer than that. So there's a problem here. And I think that we're never going to find out because the most powerful people in the world are not allowing us to find out. It is what it is. It is what it is.
So I didn't get into it because I had already gotten so much information. Mm-hmm. But there was a couple of different federal investigations, and they all came to the same conclusion. There was a lot of rebuttals to those investigations. And most of the reports and all the testimony from the wife, the mom, the brother, co-workers, Ruth, like all of the testimonies and stuff, it's scripted. Mm-hmm. You can go in and read everything, and you could come to your own conclusion.
Yeah.
Will we actually ever know the absolute truth? No, we won't. But we want to know what you think, Chatters. Did Lee Harvey Oswald work alone? Or was it the man on the grassy knoll? Was it the umbrella man? Right. And there's other theories and stuff out there, too. Was it a mob hit?
God, yeah. There's so many plausible theories.
There is, yeah. There is, absolutely. I mean, and when you think about it, too, when we talked about Marilyn and her ties to favoring communism in Mexico when she went down to Mexico, right, and what happened to her and the conspiracy surrounding that, and then you've got, I don't know, it seems like very, very related. I don't know if there's ever been like a tie in. Robert Kennedy, that bastard. He's behind it all.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I'm just kidding.
Oh my God. Well,
but that was a lot of things you probably did not know about Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, no, I never came at this story through Lee Harvey Oswald. I always went to JFK.
Of course, yeah.
I learned a lot that I did not.
And there's all kinds of stuff out there on JFK. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, and even and we talked a bit about conspiracies, but I really, for this one, I did not plan on doing 2 parts.
Right.
But there was so much, and there was a lot that I did not include.
Right.
I did the best I could, but it took forever to go through the documents that I did go through, but there's 11,406 documents out there.
Well, okay, we'll give you another week, Kat. Okay? Give Kat another week, Chatters. Let her get through the documents.
I might lose my voice by then.
So that's a good idea, Chatters. Why don't you guys? We'll do a poll of which is your favorite conspiracy, or if there's a conspiracy we don't know. There's something that we don't know that we should look into. Let us know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. And because we don't want to leave you hanging, for more information on this case, please check out After That Crime Chats.
And as I mentioned, all of the pictures are going to be up there, a lot of the ones that I found. And there's a picture of him standing at the 214 Neely Street house that they rented, the one that Marina said she liked because of the porch for June, to go outside on the porch, where he's standing with a piece of paper and a rifle. Like, it shows him basically, like, this is my fictitious document, and this is my rifle standing out in front of my house. Yeah. So there's all kinds of stuff. There's pictures of Jack Ruby. There's pictures of Jack Ruby killing Lee Harvey Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's autopsy, of course, the infamous Dealey Plaza, avenues from the Texas School Book Depository shooting, like, going down, the point of view where he would have been looking, just that whole area. And you'll see pictures of the Umbrella Man as well. So don't forget to follow us as well, Chatters. Crime Chat with Nat and Kat, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, to see what we have coming up next. And it's Natalie's turn.
Yes. It is my turn next time. It's going to be fun. Not going to tell you. No hints. Shh. So remember, Crime Chat with Nat and Kat, subscribe to our Patreon. You'll get bonus episodes and behind the scene bloopers, and take a look at the merch.
Yes, you don't want to miss it, Chatters. You don't want to miss the next episode. We will see you on the next Crime Chat.